and welcome to Logan Sounds Off, where I talk about books, music, and a whole lot more. I'm your host, Logan Kelly. Hello and welcome to Logan Sounds Off. Today I am interviewing Circuit3, also known as Peter Fitzpatrick. How are you, Peter?
I'm great, Logan. How you doing? Brilliant to be here. I'm a fan of the podcast.
I'm doing good, thank you. For those who don't know you, which is very little, your music's been getting a lot of reception lately. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm based in Dublin, in Ireland. And I guess people, the first thing they'll want to know is, well, what kind of music do I make? And I make what I call synthpop, which is sort of pop music using synthesizers and drum machines. I think more generally it's referred to as electronic music because it uses electronics. Um, and as we'll find as we might get a chance to talk about my new album, I can explain a little bit more about specifically what kind of electronic music it is. But if you were to think about artists that would have really influenced me, it would be people like Vince Clarke, who founded Depeche Mode and Yazoo and Erasure, Martin Ware, who started the Human League and Heaven 17, and maybe artists a little bit more obscure like The Normal and Fad Gadget and Cabaret Voltaire, sort of electronic artists. Modern artists maybe that I like a lot would be, there's a Belfast-based artist, her name is Hannah Peel, and she's extraordinary. I think she's probably one of the best modern writers out there. And then others like, I think LaRue is pretty cool. And I'm a fan also of, there's a UK act called Working Men's Club who are really good. They're a little bit more industrial. And then out of the American acts, I'm a big fan of a duo called Boy Harsher, who I saw playing live in Dublin 3 years ago. So while I've got a lot of influence from the past, because I'm very, very, very old, I've got a bunch of people from now today who I just admire hugely. I've always played music. Would have always tried to get access to instruments, and I only really started releasing material under my own name about 8 years ago. Mostly because I didn't have the confidence to do it, and I was encouraged to actually start putting some of it out, and the reception has been great. I'm on my third album now. So that's a little bit about me. I have a home studio, as you can see, and any free time I get, this is where I'm hanging out.
Wow, that's so interesting. And I've read that you are into Vince Clarke, and I remember seeing parts with Yazoo, and I had never heard of Yazoo, surprisingly. And then I saw Depeche Mode, and I went, I know he is a great guy, and I see why he's one of your influences. But I also read one of your influences was Paul McCartney, and I was
Yes.
going, Circuit3, Paul McCartney. They don't really match. Not in a bad way, but they do not
Not what
match.
you would expect, is it?
So, how did Paul McCartney influence you?
Yeah, that's well researched. You've caught me out there. So let me let me explain that. So um, I I first got um I first got into music around about the age of 8 or 9, maybe 10 years old. So that was back in the 70s. And the simple answer to who is the greatest band in the world would have been the Beatles. That was what everybody pretty much agreed on. So I was always fascinated by the music of the Beatles, and I've been a huge fan of them. Um, like the first album I bought was a Beatles album, Abbey Road. Um, so I was a huge fan. I've been to see Paul McCartney play live a few times. I still buy his music. And strangely enough, there is a connection between Paul McCartney and sort of electronic music like Circuit3 produces. So there's two things. The first one is Paul McCartney as a songwriter. He 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 and John Lennon pretty much um, they they created the foundation for modern pop songs. Just they kicked the door in, and all these other songwriters came in writing amazing pop songs. So there's that piece. There's the song writing side of it. Regardless of what instruments you're using, you have to have a good song to start with. So I've learned a lot from observing what he's done. And then the other side is, in 1980, he released an electronic album called McCartney 2. And it was just him in a room a little bit bigger than this one, but using some of the available synthesizers and drum machines of the day. And he produced this album called McCartney 2, and he put it out, and there was a couple of hit singles on it, like Coming Up, which is not very electronic, a ballad called Waterfalls, which is quite electronic, and then on the album itself, there's quite experimental stuff. The critics didn't like because he, I think because he was being different and he was trying to be a little more original. And I love the album because it reminds me of some of my favorite artists. There's a Japanese group called Yellow Magic Orchestra, or YMO. And if you listen to that Paul McCartney album, McCartney 2, and you'll recognize it because it's just a picture of his face,
Yeah.
on the front of it. And you'll see it's on all the streaming sites. And if you listen to the sounds that he's using, they're actually the same instruments that Yellow Magic Orchestra were using in Japan at the time. I think he was listening to the Yellow Magic Orchestra. I suspect he was, and I think he was very influenced by them. And then a cool thing happened a few years ago. He reissued the album, he remastered it and put it out, but he put out a second disc of bonus tracks, and
Oh.
they were really experimental. And it turns out originally he wanted to put the album out with all the weird experimental electronic stuff, but I think he realized that there was no way it was going to be accepted. It was too out there. It was too different and too, for the critics and everything. And he would have been slaughtered in the music press for it. So
Oh,
when we
wow.
finally got to hear those songs, they're really very experimental and really interesting for me anyway. So that's something. Now if people want to figure out the connection between electronic music and the Beatles, there's that one. And then of course George Harrison also did an electronic album back in the 60s. So there is actually a link, believe it or not.
Wow. And I actually have to ask because I was in my sitting room with my mom and we were decorating our Christmas tree, and a
Yeah.
Wonderful Christmas Time came on. And was it that album that had Wonderful Christmas Time? Because I went, that sounds nothing like Paul McCartney. It's so
Very
electronic.
synthy, isn't it? Yeah. It's
Yeah.
around about the same time. It's around about the same time. I think Wonderful Christmas Time was recorded I'm trying to remember. I think it was recorded just before that McCartney 2 album, but he had a lot of synthesizers around him at the time. So the Wonderful Christmas Time track is well spotted. If you actually listen to that, that's a huge amount of electronics in it.
Yeah.
It's a synth pop Christmas song, which I think
Yeah.
is very funny because at the time people were getting into cool electronic music and were dismissing Paul McCartney, and yet he was like in the top 10 with the most electronic Christmas song ever.
Yeah.
Which I think is really
Because
funny.
I always thought of it as an unusual song, but in a brilliant way. And it's definitely one of my favorite Christmas songs for that
Yeah,
reason, because
me
it was
too.
so out there. And
Yeah.
another question that I've got for you, what inspired the whole idea of Circuit 3?
So, well, I think so. I'm a solo artist. I've been in bands. I'm a solo artist for practical reasons. Um, because I have a day job. I have a family, but they're adults now. But there's two cats, one of whom is mooching around the studio here, and he's gone very quiet, which makes me nervous. I'm just worried. Oh, there he is. He's sitting down beside me. And so there's that. So just the practicalities of not being able to go to a couple of rehearsals a week. Because if you're in a band and you're really into it, You have to commit the time to it. So I figured, well, I've got limited time, so okay, as a solo artist, so does that. And also I like the control of being in charge and not having to negotiate and, you know, get agreement from multiple people, so I can just do it the way I want to do it. And then the other piece is the name, which came from a friend of mine, Dan Prendeville, who is an amazing artist. He's down in Nina in Tipperary, and we've been friends for many years. And I was telling him, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna put these songs out, this electronic stuff that I was afraid to put out because I didn't think anybody wanted to hear it." And I was trying to come up with a name, and he said, "Well, what about Circuitry?" And he said, "But with the number three." And he said, "Because it's like the Irish accent, because of the way we pronounce the word circuitry." And I
So
thought,
cool.
oh yeah, that makes sense. And I thought that's really clever. That's actually really clever. He's really good at words, Dan. He's really clever. And I thought that's really cool. So I started using it, and then I've done lots of interviews like this for everything from magazines to like online shows and everything. And I realized very quickly it's not as clever as I thought, because people outside of Ireland don't get the joke. And I have to explain I have to explain what it means to everybody. No, it's the word circuitry. But if you think about the Irish accent, and you can see the penny dropping after a couple of minutes, they realize, oh yeah, it's an Irish accent thing. Okay. But I'm stuck with it now because I've
Yeah,
started.
yeah. Um, wow, the penny just dropped for me. I don't know, is it because I don't really get it or because I just never spotted it? But I always thought it was a really cool, kind of quirky name. And I was going to ask you, where did you get it from? Because it's such an out there name. I've never heard another name like that in a
Part of
really
the
good way now.
part of the attraction was we're about to be invaded by a cat. You were not invited here. Here, come on, get in front of the camera and say hello to everybody. Go on, say hello. Now, I'm gonna.
Oh,
He has been walking on the computer keyboard here. Do not. Okay, you're okay up there. Sorry, he's inspecting over my work area here. Don't trust him. Um, but it's kind of cool because I think you have to have, if you're going to do electronic music, I think there has to be a number in the name, or it has to have it just has to have a bit of mystery about the name. Like when Depeche Mode first came out, it was like two French words, and we're like, what does that mean? And you look it up and you find out, oh, it's fast fashion. What does fast fashion
wait,
mean?
what?
Yeah, and Yazoo. Like, what is a Yazoo, and where would I buy one? And then you find out it was a blues label in America
I
because
think Yazoo is also like a chocolate milk brand as well.
it is. Yes, it
Yeah, and
is.
banana milk as well.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and it's a very American word, and it came from a blues label, which I found out later on, and it's a place as well. It's a place called Yazoo, which but yeah, I think I do. I love the idea of a sort of a futuristic name. So could Circuit 3, could that be a place? Could it be like a district, in a science fiction film, or could it be the name of a robot, or what could it be? And so
Do you know what? Wally is a good name, but I think Circuit 3 will be a great name for a robot.
well, if Disney want to give me a shout, I'm willing to cut a deal with them if they want to do a branded Circuit 3 robot for their next film.
That would actually be so cool.
I have a robot in here. Where is it? Oh, I don't. I have a little C3PO. Oh yeah, I brought it into the house to put new batteries in it.
That is so cool. A tiny C3PO. That is really cool.
Yeah, like some bit. I was I so I went. I used to love science fiction films, so characters like C3PO and so on are always close to my heart.
Wow. Something that you're saying there with your solo career, and I can definitely get the whole not having to negotiate kind of
Yeah,
side of things. But you
yeah,
also said you were kind of in between some groups.
yes.
And I read that you were in a group with Brian Downey,
Oh,
um,
yeah.
yeah, who is the ex Thin Lizzy drummer, and then that led to doing a couple of gigs with Gary Moore, who was another ex Thin Lizzy member, which then led to a Thin Lizzy reunion that was a one off. How did that kind of happen or work out?
So, oh boy. So we're talking about the mid 1980s. I was in university, and you're really going to have to use your imagination here. I had long blonde hair. Like when I say long, it was like down to here, and it was spiky blonde hair. So it
I
was
don't
very
know what
odd.
face to make.
Oh well, you know, most people didn't know at the time either. So it was, so I was playing a
No, no,
gig.
keep saying, keep talking. Yeah,
Yeah, it was in the Bag Inn, and I was approached by a very good friend. Well, he became a very good friend after this. It was the first time I met him, and he said, "Do you want to join a band? You know, to play a regular gig, you can earn a bit of money. You're a student. I'm sure you'll like it." And I kind of knew who Thin Lizzy were. I mean, everybody in Ireland knew who Thin Lizzy was, but I wasn't a
yeah,
hardcore fan, which I think probably helped because I wasn't phased by meeting Brian, who was cool with fans. It was just that I wasn't starstruck. I admired him as a
yeah,
musician, so that helped a bit. And we would do. It was so far removed from electronics. It was kind of rock and blues, but it was a really good education from me on how to perform live, how to improvise. Um, I learned a lot from Brian about the use of, you know, the use of drums and songs and how they can propel a song along, and pushing the beat and so on. Like really a great education. And he had obviously, he had toured the world, so he had huge experience. So we did that for a while, and then one night Gary Moore dropped in to visit Brian, brought his guitar and played with us, which was brilliant. There's photographs floating around, I think, on Facebook and Twitter from that night. And then I found myself one night then with a call from Brian saying we're going to do a gig. There was an annual thing, the Vibe for Philo, that they did, like a tribute thing every year. And this was in early 1990, and he gave me a call and said, "Listen, we're going to do the Vibe for Philo, so you should come on down." And I found myself on stage with Brian, who had played by them for a couple of years, um, a friend of ours, Pat, playing bass, and then Eric Bell, who was the original guitar player on Whiskey in the Jar, came along
no
and played.
way.
And what was really cool was they made a small little VIP area in the bar, and I'm sitting there beforehand playing with them, and two chaps I went to school with walked in the leather jackets. They were rockers, and one of them saw me, and his jaw dropped, and then I could see the look of confusion on his face, as if he was like, "What's he doing there?" And then he nudged the other lad and said, he's probably just hanging out with them. And then when we got up to play, the two of them were up at the front, and then I could see the two of them there just staring to see what's he doing up there with the lads with the Lizzie. So that was really funny. That was bizarre, but
Did
it
you
was a
have
great
to
education.
did you
Yeah.
have to explain to them what had happened?
I caught them later on, and I just said, "Yeah, I've been playing with Brian for a long time." They said, "Can we say hello to Brian?" And of course, So that was really funny. It was just doing that, and I haven't seen them since. I think they live in Australia or something now, or America. But it was yeah, that was weird. Just sort of because
That is so
I hadn't seen them because we'd all left school a few years beforehand. But working with Brian was brilliant because he taught me so much about how songs were written. Like the boys are back in town. Everybody knows that Thin Lizzy song. We were rehearsing it, and I said like 4 or 5 different songs. He said, "Yeah, songs," and we realized if we took the best bits out of each of them and joined them up, it became "The Boys Are Back in Town." And then if you ever listen to "The Boys Are Back in Town" and you just hear, that's why it keeps changing as it's going through, because it was bits out of different songs they were working off, which I thought that's really clever.
No way.
Yeah, so
That
if
is
imagine the
such
song
good
in your head.
songwriting.
Yeah, so like if you go and like pull it up somewhere online and you'll hear it, guess who just got back today, and then it goes through that, and then it changes, and then it changes again, and that's what makes it such a cool
It
song.
does. Now that I'm thinking about it in my head, yes, it does sound like
Yeah.
some of the other songs. That is so cool, and it's such a good songwriting tip.
Oh,
Wow.
well, that's what I got off. And he said, if you're stuck for something, you'll find that you can take a bit out of that, a bit out of that, a bit out of that, put them together. Use the verse from that song, use the chorus from that song, use the intro from that song, put them together, and you've got something that's really interesting because it varies as you go through it. And I thought that's
Yeah,
really clever.
I'm just thinking. Usually, when I usually like sometimes work on music software, and I'm
Yeah,
thinking when you're trying to match things with other songs or trying to take pieces from other songs, what I always find really annoying is the tempo on it. So I'm just thinking that would be so hard yet so cool to be
yeah,
able to make.
yeah. And that was, yeah, there was things like that that I just learned from conversations with him, which was great, or when we'd be doing a rehearsal or something.
That's really interesting. And actually, I've got a bit of a question for you here now. Um, my favorite song of yours is "Safe to Sleep." When I heard this, it sounded so familiar. It sounded really, really familiar, and in the greatest way possible. And I wanted to ask, what was the inspiration for this song?
It was, ooh, boy. Um, so I'm trying to remember. So Safe to Sleep. So I've three albums. And when I finished the first album, I had a couple of songs left over that I didn't finish for it. And that was one of them. And when I remember being in this room writing it, and I was imagining that I was Gary Newman. Because
It sounded so like Gary Newman, the synth on
yeah,
it.
yeah, and I deliberately used a couple of sounds similar to what he would have used. And I wanted to do something that would sound, because I was starting to do gigs, and I wanted to do something that would sound huge in a big PA system. So the big bass note at the beginning, and the chorus sound and the lead synth sound. I wanted something big and bombastic that would just sound massive through PA system. So that's where the I guess the that's where the idea of how I wanted it to sound came from. Definitely like a Gary Newman type of thing. And then the lyrics came from a friend of mine, Brian McCluskey, who is we've never met. We've only met online. He's originally from Derry, and he lives near California, sort of the west coast of America. And he will sometimes send me lyrics, and we've co-written a couple of things. Every album has one song that we've co-written, and I'm working on some new songs at the moment from it. He just sends me lyrics, and I print them out and go through them, and something will stick. And that came from, I think it was a dream he had or something. Like, so the lyrics don't really mean anything. They're kind of like dream lyrics, and they just fit because I'd written the backing track, and I kind of had the melody for the vocal melody, but it was all nonsense words. It just didn't, like, it was just vowel sounds and nonsense words, just so I could record. This is what I think the melody will sound like when it's sung. And he had sent me these lyrics from a dream that he had. Didn't really mean anything. Like, dreams are just a jumble of things, and they just happen to fit perfectly. So you'll have to ask Brian what the song's about, but I think he doesn't know himself.
That is one of the greatest explanations for a song I have ever heard. It
Thank you.
came from my friend's dream.
Yeah.
Yeah, lyrics that you can spend hours on them and you'll never
Oh,
get there. You could just listen to one thing and you can go, that fits perfectly. That
yeah.
is actually so cool. And then with your album, Richard Dowling, who's known for his work with David Bowie, Foo Fighters, New Order,
Yeah.
He mastered your album. What was it like working with him?
So Richard Dowling was recommended to me. I don't have all of the vinyl here. Well, I don't. This was the first album I did, Silicon Chip Superstar, and I was looking around for recommendations for somebody who understood electronic music. And so I went to Richard. I tried him for one song, and he did the mastering. So for people who don't know, when you finish your recording, there's one more step when you've got all of these. It used to be tapes, but now it's here's a digital file, here's the finished song.
Yeah.
So when you've got all of your songs for the album and you want to put them in the right order, and sometimes you want the end of one to overlap with the next to do little crossfades, but also you want it to sound consistently at the same level so that you're not constantly reaching for the volume control to turn it up and down. And so mastering is part of all of that, but it also he can enhance the sound quite a lot. So I went to his studio in Limerick, and he did an amazing job. He's got a great pair of ears, but more importantly, he's got so much experience. Like some of the artists you've mentioned there, he's worked with everybody, like from Bowie to Motorhead, Waterboy, Sinead O'Connor, Christy Moore, you name it, he's worked with them. And he's also a big fan of artists I love, like guy like Gary Newman. So, and I brought one of my friends with me, and he said to me as we were listening back to it when he'd finished, he said, because the speakers he has in his studio are amazing. And my friend Dan said to me, you'll never hear your album so well ever again because the room is just perfect. It's acoustically treated, and he's got these amazing speakers. And I said, yeah, I'll probably never hear it as good as this again because it was just a perfect environment. So yeah, I trust Richard with everything he did. Like my first album, Silicon Chip Superstar, he did my second one, The Price of Nothing, The Value of Everything, and he mastered the newest one, Technology for the Youth. I use him for everything.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is very thorough. And then when I saw this guy, I just went, wow, at the amount of people he worked with. You were saying there, everybody worked
Yeah.
with everyone. And that's crazy. And you were talking about recording there. I've actually got a question about gigs.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite venue?
To go to a gig, or to play. So I think my favorite venue for going to a gig is either, hello Dexter, studio cat, come here, no, come and sit in my lap. No, you're not jumping up there. My favorite gig to go to, it's a tie-up between the Olympia in Dublin City
Wow.
and or the Roundhouse in London. And then my favorite venue to play, it's a tie-up between um oh there's a three-way tie. So many years ago when I lived in America, I lived in New York, and I think it's gone now, but there was a place called, I think, the Bitter End in Greenwich Village in New York, which was a brilliant place to play. In Ireland, I think the favorite venue to play, and I haven't played it in many, many, many years, is probably the Olympia because it's laid out like a proper theater. Um, and then my other option then would be in London, probably a venue called Electroworks, which is this grungy, badly in need of a lick of paint type of venue in London, which I've played a couple of times and is good fun.
Wow, and I was actually only just in the Olympia. I watched the Olympia's play that they did this year. Is that the Tree Olympia?
Yeah, that's what the brand is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, and obviously with the background behind you, we know that you play keyboards and synthesizers and things like that. But do you play any other instruments?
Yeah, I play a bit of guitar, so I sometimes write my songs on guitar. I'm not a very good guitar player. I could do enough to sort of to get by. I play piano, which I see as a different instrument to synthesizers. And I used to when I was very young, like I played traditional music. I mean, I've forgotten all how to do it now because it's been that long. At one point, I played fiddle and whistle and stuff. So
Wow.
yeah, and I think at one stage I even played saxophone. Where if I could borrow the instrument and find someone to show me how to play it, I'd play it. But that's many, many years ago. I think now I just think of myself as an electronic musician that uses the keyboard as a way to control a synthesizer.
That is really cool. And when like you see that kind of background, and when you hear that kind of music, and you hear you play the saxophone at one point, that's crazy, but in like a really, really good way.
Yeah.
My final question for you, and
Yeah.
this is something that I really want to talk to you about, is can you tell us a little bit more about your album Technology for the Youth? And on the front where it shows, I think it's a woman pointing up. Is that Valentina Tereshkova?
Ah, well done. So people listening to this are thinking, why is he talking about Valentina Tereshkova? So you've done your research. So I would say,
Actually, that I didn't research that, just so you know. I
oh
kind of
really?
guessed that.
Oh,
Yeah, I
well done.
guessed that.
So it could be. So my daughter Alison drew the artwork, and it's intended to trigger your imagination. Yes, it could be Valentina. I think what it's trying to get across is some of the stories on the album, and people can read about the album online. There's reviews everywhere, but it's about the untold stories of the space race. So everything from we always hear, and there's nothing wrong with what they did. We always hear about the first men on the moon and all of the American achievements, which were brilliant. We hear less about what happened in other countries. We hear less about the first woman in space. We we
Yeah.
we forget about the animals that were sent to space. Um, we then, of course, we there's also these crazy conspiracy theories and made up stories, and I
Yeah.
have fun with them. They can be fun writing songs with. But on the front, if you look really careful, the person on the left is holding a planet, or is it the moon, in their hand, and it's a skeleton inside the spacesuit.
Yeah, I noticed
That
that
kind
and
of
I went, what is that?
I think now Alison will probably tell me a little more, but I think that represents the danger of space travel because it was a very dangerous thing, and it still is. But there's that, and then I think the person on the right, I think that's Valentina, and I think that's meant to represent sort of the untold stories. Like, for
Yeah.
example, the song Spacewalking, the slow song on one of
Yeah.
the songs of the album. So that was written when I read about Ed Dwight, he was meant to be the first Black African American in the NASA program, but he got messed around big time by NASA and the American government, and he never got to go. So stories like that people never hear about, and they hear about all the political interference and so on. So I think that's what the cover represents. It represents sort of a mixture of all of the themes from it. And even, on the back, the way the sort of the track listing looks like it's been stuck on, because all the planning was all done on paper. They didn't have calculators or computers to
Yeah.
help. So there was a lot of paper and sticking things on and figuring it out, which when you think about it, the achievements of scientists back then were just wild, amazing.
Wow. That has explained a lot for me about the album. I presumed it was about space though. So thank you for answering that question. And that's all my questions done now. So thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thanks so much, Logan. A real pleasure to meet you, and congratulations on the podcast. It's fascinating.
Pleasure to meet you too. Bye.
Bye now. Cheerio.
I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Logan Sounds Off. You can follow me on X, Facebook, and Instagram at Logan Sounds Off. And don't forget to subscribe and not miss any more cool episodes. Bye, guys!